Welcome back to Holistic Healing Association. I'm Erin Darcy. I'm certified in body processing and clinical hypnosis. Today, we will be discussing our golden shadows because everyone has inner goodness and self-worth. And I have a personal friend of mine, David Buckland, who's come to join us to discuss his deep insight into golden shadows. Thank you so much for joining us. And can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, thanks, Erin. It's good to see you again. My name is David Buckland, as mentioned. I'm an author and blogger. I explore topics related to spirituality and healing, and um, I'm certified in body processing, somatic therapy, like Erin. That's how we met. Yes, and so one of the things that's fascinated me is tying together what I had studied before with what I was learning from studying somatic therapy and exploring about stress and trauma and the ways that influences our experiences and appreciation, or how much happiness we have in the world, in our life experience.
And what is trauma?
Well, trauma is essentially the way the body responds to stress. Now, we tend to think of trauma like, acute trauma, like a car accident or something like that, something, you know, sudden and dramatic. But really, if it's any kind of strong experience or something we're resisting or whatever like that, it triggers the body's stress response. We experience it as a threat in some way. As, we don't want to be angry. We don't want to, it's not safe to be angry. And so anger comes up. We experience that as a threat. We try to suppress it. And it shifts us into a flight or fight or flight response, stress response. And this shifts our body. So rather than having our forebrain, our executive function working and our digestion working, it shifts us into the muscles and hormones for quick action. And so we're kind of muted. We get a little stupider in certain ways. And it's important to understand that everything we experience has to be digested, not just the food we eat, but the things we experience through the senses, our thoughts, our emotions. It all has to be processed. And so when it's really big in some way, when there's big emotions or overwhelming ideas, some thing we're hearing in class, that can trigger the stress response when we're not able to process it. Now, usually when the perceived threat passes, we then can shake off the stress response and digest the experience. But when it exceeds our capacity, then we resist the processing, or we resist the processing, or it persists for a long period of time, like we're in a really high stress job or circumstance, and we're not able to process and complete the experience. So what happens is we kind of put it aside to process later. But if we have the habit of suppressing, which is pretty common for most people, then we don't come back to it. And if it starts to come up again, the body always wants to heal, so it starts to bring it up again. We just clamp it down again automatically without even being conscious of it, just an automatic response. We may have been taught when we were young, for example, that anger was unsafe or unacceptable in some way. And so when anger starts to surface, we suppress that down again because that's not safe. And that just kind of sustains that stress response, and it gets laid into the body, and we carry it around with us. And the thing is, the body does a good job of storing that kind of thing, but when we don't deal with it, it's kind of sitting in there acting like a shadow. And so it kind of shadows our experiences. Then if we're not able to, experience our anger as an example, then we're not able to be assertive safely. Doesn't feel safe or comfortable. We're not able to stand up for ourselves or have healthy boundaries and so forth. And then, we can end up with kind of like a little volcano there in our belly of unsuppressed or of unprocessed, suppressed anger. And it's the same with fear and shame and all the other kind of emotions you can think of. Also with love, we may have most of us, once you get to be old enough, you will have had some experience of heartbreak from a relationship that didn't work out. And then we can develop this experience that, oh, it's not safe to fall in love. And so that, even though there's a part of us that wants to be loved and love, um, there's another part of us that's like, ooh, we don't want to go through that again. But this old saying, it's better to have loved than lost than never to have loved at all.
Very true.
Anyways, yeah. Now the important thing about trauma to understand is it's not about what happened. It's how we receive or perceive and respond to what happened and our reaction to it. So, for example, if we're suppressing that anger, then um, then we're much more likely to have a trauma response when something happens to make us angry in a natural kind of way. And one of the examples I sometimes use is, say two people are working on the same job and they both get fired. Now, the first one has been fired before. For them, it led to a better life. So even though the firing might be unpleasant, they can quickly process the experience and move on. The second one, however, was already struggling to meet expectations in the job and had never been fired before. Their resources are more limited, and so they take the experience more personally and have more difficulty dealing with the experience, which leads to overwhelm and then trauma. Neither person is right or wrong. It's simply their own capacity and how they responded to the event. Different people will find different things more or less difficult. Some of us have a real easy time with um, say relationship dynamics, but struggle a lot with asserting themselves at work. So it kind of depends on your area. Now, you mentioned about golden shadows.
Yes, what can you tell our viewers what are golden shadows?
So this trauma or resistance to our experiences kind of creates a shadow effect in our physiology because those unresolved experiences get stored in our body. Now, when that acts like kind of a shadow, like I mentioned before, if something might make us feel angry in some way, then this anger isn't acceptable, then it kind of has a triggering response and so forth. And because this is all automatic, we might not even be aware of it. And another thing though that gets entangled at it, I touched on love, how love can get uh, shadowed because of past difficult experiences that we didn't finish processing. In the same way, our talents and gifts can get entangled. Say, for example, when we're young, we have a natural inclination to want to sing or express ourselves vocally, but then, our parents are like, not now, not now, quiet, quiet, or we start classes in kindergarten and it's like, it's quiet time, be quiet. And so we may develop shame or other something else around this gift of ours. And so it gets suppressed and it doesn't feel safe to express that as we grow older. And we don't recognize that because it's unconscious. So we become an adult and we're mystified about what we're good at because what we're actually good at has been suppressed. And so they call those golden shadows because they're shadows, but they're the shadows on the good stuff, not just on the difficult experiences.
That makes sense.
And some of the symptoms of trauma that we've got in there are, things like we're triggered in certain ways, or uh, we get reactivity, if something comes close to those things we're trying to suppress, or our mind babbles, or we overreact to certain kinds of experiences. Those are all symptoms of unresolved trauma. And healing a trauma is actually pretty straightforward. It can, the bigger stuff can take time. and we have to learn the process. But it's been really helpful for me to work with other other students and people who became somatic therapists, um, because I learned to recognize when trauma was being stirred up, or triggered in some way, and when I was suppressing certain kinds of experiences or resisting them in some way, and then learning how to regulate my nervous system so that I start from a place of calm, and then allow that unresolved experience to show up in my life. And that not only helped me let go of um, the traumatic parts, but also the golden shadow parts. Uh, Classic example for me, I mentioned at the beginning that I'm a writer, and when I was in school, circumstantially, I wasn't very good at writing. Basically, I hadn't had enough practice. I changed schools a couple of times, and the particular schools had taught how to write at different points.
Mm.
And so I ended up in this class with very little practice at essay writing, and the teacher basically decided I was a failure at that, and was quite dismissive. And even though I worked really hard that year to learn to write better, he still flunked me. And um, and so that left a real a trauma type impression on me. And so even though later on I became a reasonable writer, I I thought it was one of the things I thought it was something I was bad at. But in actual fact, I'm actually quite good at it. It turns out, people have told me.
Well, you've written a couple books now, right?
Yeah, is it right? Exactly.
We have
Uh,
an author here, everyone.
and people, thank you. And people tell me all the time how much they appreciate my articles and my explanations. Um, I do some support work for people going through spiritual transformations as well. And people can be quite challenged by their experience, that they need some context. But once they understand what they're experiencing, then it's fine. They don't. There's no need to. They know how to relate to it, and so then they're not resisting it and causing trouble for themselves.
I understand.
Um, but it's just this barrier I had, this traumatic impression I had, that I was a bad writer, even though later, development, I even won an award one time in university for an essay I wrote. There was still this early, my childhood impression that I was a bad writer, which got in the way of me expressing it. And finally, I was able to clear that, and then I just started to write. I didn't think about it or plan it or anything. It just naturally started to come out because I removed the resistance to that. So the natural expression began.
So then you're allowed,
Yeah,
right?
there's
You're just
an inner
you were
allowing.
able to express yourself
Yes, naturally.
and not
Yeah,
have to push down your golden shadow.
yeah,
And then you
exactly.
wrote a few books.
Yeah, no, I've published one book and I have two more in the process. I've
That's
also
amazing.
I also mentioned being a blogger, and it surprises me when I think about it, but there's coming up on 2,500 articles in the blog. I've been blogging for a while now, but it's coming up on 20 years. But
That's a
still,
long time.
it's a lot of articles. Yeah, I was especially early on. I had once that the gateway opened, I had so much to say, that it just like I had to manage how I was posting the articles because I was posting so many that my readers couldn't keep up.
Okay. And how do our childhood and culture teach us that being too much or too talented was a threat to belonging?
Well, if you think about it, schools are structured in a way to make people teach people to fit in so that they can be useful cogs in the wheel of society, we could say, useful workers. But even, kids with entrepreneurial tendencies aren't going to be supported very well in a school environment. So it depends then it depends on their home environment as to whether that's supported. Or people that, you know, my mother didn't see herself as creative at all, and on my two sisters and I all had a creative side, and my mother couldn't relate to that. She was promoting academics. You know, there was a lot of pressure in my family. Both my parents were teachers, and so there's a lot of pressure in my family to pursue academic work and you know, university and so forth, and sciences, the core sciences. You know, I wanted to study film, which they considered of no value, and then later on, I wanted to study philosophy, which I think they saw even more. And in certain ways, it's true. I mean, I remember having a conversation with my Western philosophy professor about how you support yourself as a philosopher, and his way was to teach. but but it but that I mean, then there was a part of that that was true. I do have an academic style, but it's just the way that I wanted to express, which wasn't aligned with what my parents expected of me.
And why do sometimes we fear our own goodness, our own greatness, and our inner worth, and push it down?
Well, that closely relates to that golden shadows I talked about before, where when we were young, and it was often suppressed, especially early school. You know, they're trying to these. I admire elementary school teachers. You know, you got these kids in grade 1 and 2, and some of them didn't go through kindergarten or whatever, and so they come into a scenario where they used to get to run and play in the yard or whatever, and live a pretty unstructured life, and suddenly they have to step into a structured environment. And in that, you know, it's not unusual for shame to be used as a way to control behavior, and that can leave pretty big impressions on
Why
a
is
society.
that?
Well, when children are young, they see everything personally. You know, for example, my father died when I was very young, and at that age, I tend to think that for some, you know, I didn't deserve a father for some reason because all the kids around me had dads and I didn't, and so it's about me and something I did, you know, at that age, because we're seeing everything through the lens of ourselves, not an egoic way, but just in a way of seeing everything, uh, taking everything personally, basically, because we experience ourselves as the cause of our experiences at that age, and even earlier, you know, before the age of 2, we're kind of like these sponges. We're just soaking up all the experiences around us to adapt to the environment we're born into. And we're like these sponges, and it's precognitive. You know, in the stages of development, when we're first born, we're just kind of these, like I mentioned, sponges, and we're learning how to walk and talk and you know, eat, and just those basic kinds of functions, and then gradually then kind of our emotional dynamics come online, you know, around the age of 2, and you get kids that are mine, you know, they move into their possessive stage, where it's all about me, and then the cognitive only comes later on. You know, most people don't remember their early childhood before age about 4, because they were in a precognitive state, and now they run in a cognitive mode through the mind, and so they relate to everything that way. And so the cognitive memories they can access, but the memories from before, the precognitive memories, they can't access because there weren't mind type memories. And that's one of the things I found through the somatic, uh, going through somatic sessions, was that some of those precognitive memories surfaced, of the early traumas that I wasn't aware of. So once I was able, you know, once I was resourced and walked through the experience, I was able to see that stuff and let it go without, you know, stepping back into the trauma or whatever. It's just like you have a wave of emotion moves over you, and it can release.
And
Um,
why is it so important to be in tune with your body to understand what it's telling you? I believe you use the word.
Intuition, yeah, yeah, yeah. That's one of the advantages of becoming more aware, because our or and healing too, doing the healing work, because those those our intuitive signals is a good example is that we don't we lose access if we're suppressing how we feel, then that arena of our intuition is also suppressed in the process. It's kind of like, if we're suppressing our past experiences from a relationship breakup, we're going to have reticence coming into a relationship, and it's kind of similar on that level, where we're trying to use our intuition, but the feeling level is suppressed. Now, I can say that it varies a little bit. People talk about gut feelings and so forth, but our intuition style varies by person. Some people are more feelings and heart based, some are more gut based, and some are more somatic. They're kind of more body, kind of instinctive, yes or no kind of signals that they get. Um, and it varies a little bit by person and what style they have.
I
But
know my.
hmm,
Go ahead.
in any case, if that arena is suppressed for other reasons, then we lose our intuitive knowing.
And our authentic self.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting to. I mean, I had studied about stress and about inner dynamics back in the 70s, when that was the current science, and it was pretty surprising for me to see how far the science had come when I came back to it. I took the free trauma informed coaching course from the Center for Healing, as an introductory thing to look at it, and I was quite surprised how much the science had evolved to understand this.
Well, the
Uh,
somatic processing too is amazing to
yeah,
help us come into our bodies and become in tuned,
yeah,
right?
a
And
lot of
really,
this,
because
yeah,
the
uh,
mind can play tricks on us, but the body, if we listen to the body, it doesn't lie to us.
right. And it's interesting in spiritual circles, people talk about being present or in the now, and the body is always in the now. It's the mind that takes us into the past and the future. So it's an interesting dynamic, and it's not so trauma doesn't just affect our physical health, but it affects our emotional health and our mental health as well. Again, depending on the style of trauma and how much we're storing, and how we're storing it, and that kind of thing, how we're coping with this stuff. So a lot of, one of the things we studied was about being trauma informed, which basically means learning to regulate the nervous system, so that we're not going to be triggered the same way. We're in a more even, calmer kind of place to experience life.
Because the pain may not completely ever go away, but if we can process our emotions, it
Yeah,
can
there's
help. The
one of the
triggers
ways.
become less severe, right? They become easier and easier. Um, and we're not triggered as easy.
Yeah, one of the ways they talk about it in spiritual circles is the distinction between pain and suffering. Pain is a natural part of living in life, but suffering is optional. Suffering depends on again that kind of trauma response dynamic, where how we're whether resisting or grasping at life. And when we learn how to be with life in a natural way, and 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 to process all of the experiences that we're experiencing now, and then that shifts our habits of being. And so we have a much fuller experience of life. And then
And understanding.
we don't create suffering. Now, most people may think suffering, oh, that's what happens when someone's, you know, homeless and living on the street or something. But no, actually, most people experience suffering. because of the dynamics we've been talking about. They're not expressing the full value of themselves. They have their talents are blocked. They're they're not able to experience the emotional richness that life has to offer. Their mind is all the time, and and so they don't get a moment of peace in the day, and and then they're not able to be in the body. Like one of the things, the habits of the Western world is most people are in their heads. That's kind of how we're trained in school, and our whole culture is oriented around the mind, which some people are naturally conceptual, like I talked about with myself. My parents and I both have an academic kind of orientation, but even there's still the richness of emotions and stuff that are available to us if we do the healing work that otherwise we're kind of suppressing. And if we're not able to easily experience happiness and love and compassion and those kinds of qualities, then just the richness of life is kind of spoiled.
I agree. And when we can't be ourselves or allow others to be, it can be devastating to our health.
Yeah, we all have an inner strength and wisdom, but if we're carrying all this baggage from our history, then we're not able to express that easily. Whereas when we uncover we scrape off the muck and we heal the unresolved experiences that we've been storing, then we're able to uh, live a much fuller life. Now,
It's not always easy.
yeah,
So I
and
think it's meeting ourselves and others where they're at, but
yeah,
really just going into our body and accepting ourselves.
right,
And when we can love ourselves, we
right.
can love others.
And we can be in our body when it feels safe. But if we've been using the body as a dumping ground for the stuff that we didn't want to deal with, then the body doesn't feel safe. And so
Person.
being in the body is not easy to be. Whereas if we do this healing work, we can move back in the body. Same with the emotions. If we're suppressing all our emotions, well, not all of them, but enough of our emotions. I remember, just being aware of how we feel. I remember going to a workshop one time, and some of the people in the workshop, that were asked how they felt, how they were feeling in the moment. And some of the people were just blank. They couldn't feel anything because it was just emotions in general had come to be seen as unsafe. And so they just suppressed everything. And so their whole experience of life is just flat. And, you know, where's the richness in that? But,
Mm.
they didn't know, and they just kind of, it had become a habit, and it just kind of grew, and they developed a style of living, which when you open up your emotions, you realize was a form of suffering. Even if they weren't feeling pain, the pain was still there in their body, and they were still carrying it around, and it was still the shadow effect that has meant they were still seeing everything through that filter. So
I know.
everything was, seen through the tint of the glasses.
Or even me. Like I was just saying, like I've lost 15 to 20 pounds. And that's out of stress. So it's not always pushing it down, your stuff down. Sometimes if you're feeling it too. So I'm
Yeah,
just like, it's
it's
so
not,
that's why
I'm
it's
not
so
saying,
important to process it, not just
yeah,
push it down. Even feeling it can be very difficult. So it's best just to like process it and get it out.
yeah. Now, I'm not saying that experiencing your emotions is always going to be easy. It's not
No.
at all. I mean, we all have not only the current stuff we're experiencing, and the stress of, well, all the crazy news and all that going on. And there's the stuff at work. There's challenges at home. And there's all kinds of things. Having a spouse or child that's sick, and there's lots and lots of things that can cause stress. and difficult emotions. But if we learn to regulate our physiology so that we're in a calm and more neutral place, then we're able to allow those emotions to come up and be experienced. We may not be able to process them in the moment at work because our boss is
Hmm.
being a crazy person or whatever, or there's some uh, craziness happening. But we can, when we get home, we can have a sit for a moment, come back to calm, and then just allow the things to be processed. Just allow the digestion of the experiences to take place, and then we move through that. We're not dumping it on, adding it
And
our
none
body.
of us are perfect,
Yeah, yeah, of
right?
course.
None of us. I know I'm far from it,
Yeah, and it
but
can take time to
the
move back
journey.
through our backlog because it's we've been doing it for a long time, especially people like me my age. Uh, but the uh, but once we change the trends and change our habits for how we deal with this stuff through experience, then we're working on the backlog, and we don't need to go digging for digging through the muck, but the body wants to heal, and so it will naturally bring stuff up here and there when in a moment of calm or whatever, it'll bring stuff up to be processed, and then if we know how to come to calm and regulation, we just step into calm, we allow the experience to come up, and so we gradually we process that backlog and clear it up. And that's it again where sessions with a somatic therapist is really valuable
For
because
sure.
they can walk us through that experience. And so we can have the experience of a better way of being with our experiences. And we can see that it is actually safe to experience it. The fear we have of experiencing the shame or the anger or whatever that's in there, um, it's because of we didn't have the processing capacity before. But there's ways of improving that capacity, and there's techniques that the therapist can use to kind of bring us into it gradually, and until we know how to do it properly, and then we can shift our behavior, not perfectly as you mentioned, but um, and we just be with it in a better way, and
Yeah,
it
just
makes
being with it. Because, like
yeah
I said, none of us are perfect. I know I'm far from perfect, but
yeah
it's just like
me too
being with it, processing it, listening to it, right? Like really just listening to what our bodies are telling us,
yeah,
I think is
and
so
then
important.
yeah, and then we not only become, life can become fuller and richer, we can move more into who we are and what we're good at in our life. And so, things like work and career can be more fulfilling. Or if that we're good at singing, for example, that might not be our career, but it's certainly something we can express as a pastime.
I
And
know
it's
I'm a horrible singer though. No one would want to hear me.
yeah, no, I'm not good at singing either, actually. So that's not an example from my own life, but I've seen it, with kids. You see little
Yeah.
kids, and they're just la.
Just allow them. I know I was on a retreat in high school. I went with a group of nuns, and on the way we drove from Ontario by Toronto, Cambridge to Nova Scotia, and they wanted us to pray and sing pray the rosary throughout the whole trip, which I love praying the rosary, but it was like if ever we made a noise, we would have to pray the rosary. And um like it was a long, long trip. And then they wanted us to sing. And they wanted us to I refused because I am a horrible singer. And they tried to make me do a solo. And I refused
Well,
because
there's like,
I was like, no way. And they were like, you have to. And they really put a lot of pressure on me and a lot of pressure. And they wanted me to do a solo. And I was like, I'm not doing I am not doing a solo. And like, I refused to sing
well, that's
altogether.
stressing you out. Why push
Oh,
so
it was
much?
so stressing me out. They were putting me
Yeah,
on the spot. And I was like, I am not doing that.
yeah. And what when I was young, I don't know if they're still doing it or not, but when I was young, some of the teachers would then use shame and the other kids would jump on board with that because it's, oh, this is great. We got to, they got shamed, so they want to shame the other kids too, and
Yeah.
so then you get the whole classroom laughing at you or whatever, in those kind of circumstances. And so then you get this little, and not only do you know you can't sing or whatever, then you have this thing with like singing isn't safe. It's not safe, even that topic. Oh, we don't go near that. We want to
No, I
avoid that.
know. I
Yeah.
know. And I know even in elementary school is I couldn't skip. And we had a gym unit. It was all skipping. And I literally could not skip at all. And the teacher was trying to work with me on the side. And at the end of the unit, she brought me up in front of the whole class and said, skip. And I couldn't skip. Like it was so embarrassing. Or like I literally could not skip. I think I could do one or two. I didn't have that ability. Um,
Well, they call
but
on you in class when you're spacing out or doing something like that. They call on you to answer the question that they knew you weren't paying attention to.
well, that's exactly it. I was just, when I said that, I thought of another time is when I was in elementary school, every single day or every week, the teacher would set me out in front of everyone and ask me a question. And I never knew the answer. And then my friends were like, oh man, come on here, just write it down or something. Because every single day she'd spot me out and say, Erin, what's the answer to this question now? And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, actually, that's how they discovered that I couldn't see properly. My eyes, that I needed glasses. My eyes were starting to shift. That was like grade four, where they asked me to answer a question on the blackboard, and at that point I was my seat was near the back, and I couldn't see the board, but there was kind of squinting, and there
Oh,
was
you're like, what's the word? I
like,
don't know.
that particular teacher clued in and told my mom and just got my eyes tested and got glasses,
You
which
know
of
what?
course at that age is also something that you get shamed for. Uh,
Well, we can hang out lots of shame, right?
yeah, there's just like this laundry list of kind of things that you go through when you're kids with peer pressure and yeah. Some kids sail through that stuff though, that they have good boundaries, but I'm introverted in my nature, and so it's like getting sort of social confrontation is not as comfortable.
Yeah. And what are some of the golden shadows that people typically push down?
Well, it just really varies. It depends on what your gifts are. Like I mentioned about writing and the experience I had, but it comes from all kinds of things. Just when like kids, like I have I like to organize stuff, right? It's one of my abilities, and I made a good living organizing things for companies and stuff. And when I was a kid, I used to organize my cars and my toys and stuff like that, and line them all up and line up all the army men and this kind of thing.
Mhm.
But not my parents encouraged that.
They
However,
did? They encouraged it?
they encouraged that. They did. I
Okay.
don't know if they recognized it as a talent or anything, but just they were good with that. And but I knew a friend of mine where they discouraged it. They wanted certain kinds of they expected certain kinds of play where you
Mhm.
had to be assertive and you had to be the winner and this kind of thing. Um, and so they had a different experience of that. And there's also people who are inclined to sports or not inclined to sports. We're put in very competitive situations when we're kids, and they can be uh, uh, challenging, and you go through growth spurts, and so you get kind of out of coordination a little bit like that, and then you get shamed for not being any good when it's just you're in a transitional place. Um, I remember one time when I was in grade nine, it was in a larger school, and there was three grade nine classes, and they had all of us together in one PE class, physical education. Um, and so there's about 90 or over 90 kids in that. And they lined us all up by height. It was all boys. Okay, that's right. So it wouldn't have been 90 kids because it would have been half of them. But it was a lot of them, you know, because the girls would have been another class. But they lined us all up by height, and I was the third from the shortest. I have tall genes in my family, but also late blooming, and so
Okay.
I got my height late. Whereas there was a lot of kids that were some kids grew a little early, and then there was kind of the average ones and stuff like that. I was still 5'8" when I graduated high school. I had a growth spurt after high school.
And how tall did you end up being?
6'2".
Okay. So you beat all the kids. It just took time.
Yeah, it took time, but back at that time, it was like, the two kids that were shorter than me were kids that were expecting to be small. They were kind of uh, they knew that was their nature, so they were kind of feisty about it. But so I was quite late, and so there was kind of the shame around as a boy. There was shame around that. I'm also, an introvert. I'm not physically inclined that way, sports inclined, and so and I also had stressful, traumatic experiences with sports. Your experience there was quite different, but for me, for example, my mother insisted I join a baseball team, and I had no real practice at baseball, so I ended up on I think it was the second worst team in the league, and I was the right fielder, which is kind of like where they put the worst player. So I was pretty abysmal. So it wasn't an affirming experience for me that way. I mean, sure, I
Yes.
got some exercise in that, but ugh,
Exercise is always good.
yeah, no, exercise is good. It's just the context wasn't the best match for me at that point in my life.
Yes. But down the road, you were able to develop more.
Yeah, yeah, and I never became an athlete or anything like that, but I found things I enjoy. Like I enjoy going hiking and dance. I quite enjoy dancing, and you know, so the style, there's certain styles of exercise that I get a lot of enjoyment out, and that's very healthy. And getting because another thing with our culture is we're getting more and more sedentary, and that in itself is more challenging because for some people there's a natural affinity with movement for processing their day. They digest by through yoga or dance or just some physical going for a walk, and that helps them process their day, gives them a moment where they're not having to do something, and they can just be, and then their body can process the thoughts and emotions of the day. And some people like to
In
talk about, there's lots of different styles of it.
in what's the danger of never integrating our golden shadows and being true to ourselves?
Well, the hazard, of course, is that we don't know what our gifts are, um, our talents, and so we think we have none, maybe, and then what kind of making choices about our career and lifestyle are compromised because we don't know what we're any good at. We don't know, and we just think we're kind of a nothing. We don't really have anything to offer, which is an unfortunate way of experiencing it. It impacts our sense of self-worth and so forth.
And
So,
self-worth is so important. What are some of the golden shadows that we maybe push down? Like you had said singing, you had said writing.
well,
What else would there be?
there's also kids that are athletic. I've seen
And they
examples.
push it down?
Well, yeah, where they're supposed to sit still in class, they're not given adequate time to move,
That makes
and
sense.
and so it's they're told it's bad to be wiggly and and they really struggle with that. Uh,
Okay.
and they can get into it. And it kind of depends on how they come to it. Because some kids, they'll get into rebelling against the teacher or whatever. They'll 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 find a way that way. But some kids will take it personally on a different level, and they turn it on themselves. And so that, that I'm no good if I'm like that. And so then they don't express themselves physically naturally, and their body becomes less accessible to them because it's like there's this attitude of being bad or wrong in some way.
Okay.
It really depends. And of course there's a whole spectrum there between the extremes, or there could be a blend of those, where you're rebelling against the teacher and against yourself in a certain kind of way.
And if you had 100% guarantee success and no one could judge you, what is the one thing that you would be starting to do tomorrow?
Well, I'm not sure there'd be anything new. There's a couple of things I plan to do, but there's times like I'm trying to finish a couple more books, and not trying to. I am finishing a couple more books, um, but I'm interested in like potentially creating courses and stuff like that. But there's only so much you can do in a week, so I'm kind of doing things in step by step. But when I was younger, there was a lot of things that I wanted to do but didn't. I have gradually come to terms with who I am and what I have to offer. Um, I was a late bloomer in that as well,
Okay.
but it's interesting because there are like the organizational skills were not suppressed, and so that was a natural way I expressed. But the writing skills were, well, they were used in my job, but not as a form of self-expression. Um,
And if
and
you,
yeah, I'm just trying to think if there's anything else that's in there. Um, Actually, gradually, what I've learned is that I actually have a bunch of talents, and so there's it's a matter of choice now. What am I choosing? What brings me the most fulfillment? And so, what do I choose to express? There's a range of options now, whereas before, I didn't know I was any good at, and so careers happened
where
accidentally.
everyone has their talents, their hidden talents.
Oh yes, yeah,
Sometimes they don't even realize they have them or so much strength,
yeah, and
but
they have
I
they
believe
have, they have
a
an inner
lot
strength.
more than people believe.
Yeah, they have inner strength and calm that's there. Everybody has it, but it just tends to get covered up by the noise of the unresolved experiences.
And if you look at a trait of someone you admire, could be parent, could be a best friend, it could be someone in your life. What is one small quiet ray that you've actually shown it, that same trait this week?
This week, well, I guess it comes down to a common way I express it through writing, and I admire people who can describe abstract or subtle concepts in a clear way that people can understand. And I've gotten feedback that I have that ability. And of course, one is never perfect, but it's something that's I've gotten better at over time. I mean, I took a university writing course, and it was a required course, and that was the course that I got an award for one of my essays. But another one of my essays I didn't do so well on because I was trying to express a an abstract idea, and I stayed abstract. We kind of did a process where we would write the article, we would get feedback, and then we would rewrite the article to strengthen it. And I got more abstract when I did it. And so, but that's how I learned. You learn by doing.
Okay. What are your favorite parts about yourself that your family and friends would say are your best qualities?
Well, feedback I've gotten is that I'm very supportive, and that I help people. I can help people understand what they're experiencing and give some context and understanding to what's when they're having experienced some kind of transformation. They understand that I can explain abstract ideas in a way, or give language for people for abstract things that they're experiencing. Like one of the big things, one of the things that's quite common is our emotional stuff. Because if you've been disconnected from your emotions, the we don't have names for them, and so they're kind of this abstract thing, some of them, and so we don't know how to name them, and we're having an emotional sensation kind of, and we don't really have a name for it. So like Brené Brown did a bunch of research into this and developed a list of emotional words that people could use for that. I think it's about 40 of them or something like that. And so people can name them. Now, of course, there's one thing really important to mention on that is that the mind what names our emotions, but the mind can't process our emotions. So we can see, oh, that's anger, or that's fear, or there's shame. But being able to label shame doesn't mean you can process it that way. You have to use your emotions to process your emotions, not your mind.
I've felt
Because
a lot of shame in my life.
yeah,
And yeah,
well, because
and
that's one of
processing is huge.
yeah, because that's one of the things that because as I mentioned, we have a strongly mind-oriented culture. People try to process their emotions with the mind, and I think that, oh, I'm labeling, oh, there's the shame. That's shame. I can label it, and I can see it that there's shame there, and they think that that's how they're processing it, but that's no,
No, it's not.
that's just seeing it. You actually have to experience it to process it, experience it emotionally.
And sometimes they can be scary, but if we can really process our emotions
Yeah,
and
but then
go
we
through the pain, we can come out on the other end a lot
yeah,
stronger.
yeah, and especially if we learn how to recognize how to find calm and recognize when we're in calm and when we're not, and then when the emotions come up, we can come back to calm and experience the emotion, and then it's just like a wave moving through. It can be strong, but it doesn't have to be overshadowing. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. And there's ways for really big ones, there's ways of they call it titrating, where you kind of just touch into it and touch into it and come back and touch into it and come back and then we kind of open the gates and at a certain point it kind of drains out. Um, I've been impressed by the process where the things that were overwhelming for me when I was younger are now just like, oh, that was a big experience, but it's just fine. I can process it now. So it doesn't have to be suppressed anymore. It just needs to be seen and experienced.
Seen
And
and
then,
heard. And it's
yeah,
so important, yeah, just to allow yourself that. And why is it so important to listen to your gut and intuition, to your body and what it's trying to tell you? Honoring your authentic self and being your true self.
yeah. Now, the way I see it is that the mind is a really valuable tool, but it makes a poor master. And a lot of people have the mind in the role of the master, whereas it's really better a, 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 servant. And when we discover who we are within, then mind can take its proper role. It might kind of resist. The mind that wants to control and that kind of thing. But as we put the mind in its right place, and we heal our emotional noise and that kind of stuff, then we can tune into our more intuitive, more subtle intuitive signals. And and as I mentioned, it depends on our style of that. You get to know how we get our signals, and then we can make much more aligned decisions, decisions that are aligned with who we are and what we're good at, and what brings the best results. I found if I'm paying attention to, like, if I just use the mind to make decisions, the mind will make, it'll do, like do a yes no list or something like that. It'll good bad or whatever. It'll kind of look at it in a certain kind of way and make a choice based on its interests essentially. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. It depends on what the nature of what we're talking about. But when we're making larger life decisions like career, where we want to live, and so forth, it's much more valuable. We get much better results, put it that way, if we're tuned into that deeper intuitive knowing, uh, for ourselves, because then we're not only taking into account the mind part, we're also taking into account our authentic self, our true nature, and where we're skilled and so on like that. And it's actually, I mean, it might sound more complicated the way I'm talking about it, but it's actually much easier once that those subtle signals become familiar. Then it's much easier to make decisions because the signals are clear. We're not kind of left in a place where there's could be this, could be that. I don't know what the right decision to make is. But with the intuitive signals, then it's really clear what the right choice is. And then when we make that choice, we find it's more supported, so to speak, that things happen more easily. There isn't the same struggle over it. We have our own certainty within that we've made the right choice, and then life plays out in a way that demonstrates that it was. So it's an interesting shift. We're kind of more in tune with who we are, and when we're more in tune with who we are, then we discover that we're more in tune with the world as well, and we're more aligned with what will be supported. With We get better results. You just think about it in a career choice. Like I spent part of my career working for the police. I'm this inner directed, contemplative sort of person, and here I am in with these assertive, black and white kind of environment with sort of a paramilitary organization. I wasn't a good fit in certain ways. I mean, my organizational skills were valued and what I brought to my job, but temperamentally, it was the opposite of what I was good at, and the job ended up making me sick in multiple ways. Because it was not aligned with what I was good at, in a broader way. And
What is your body telling you?
well, it kind of depends on what it is you're feeling sick about, because it could be a trauma response. It could be an intuitive signal that something's wrong, that this is not the right direction to go in. It can, depending on, like, if you're getting a gut feeling, if that's your style of intuition, then it can feel almost like a, indigestion almost, when it's a signal that this isn't the right, you're, the right place to be, or something's wrong, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And but for me, I was the work environment was quite polluted, and so it had physical implications. but I was also under a great deal of stress. That's a whole other story. And so I was having, but the body was yeah, traumatic. But basically, it was just like an ongoing thing. I would have the occasional quiet day and that kind of stuff, but the ongoing stress levels were quite high, and so it was, I was laying in trauma through that experience, and yeah, so there was kind of psychological stress. Um, there was emotional stress, and then there was physical health stress. So it was kind of this crazy,
I
crazy.
understand.
Yeah,
Yeah, it can be a lot. And to everyone watching, what would your life look like in 6 months if you believed in magic? If you believed in the magic in yourself? Because we all have magic in ourselves and inner goodness.
yeah,
And that what you admire in others is actually a reflection of the power you have inside of you.
yeah. It's interesting. There is that thing that what you admire in others is because it resonates with yourself, and there's something of that in you. And inversely, the something we find irritating in others that bugs us or triggers us in some way is because we have something in us that reflects that. Like someone who's a bit kind of angry and aggressive uh, can be deeply triggering. I mean, it might be for like fear or whatever like that, but it can be triggering because we ourselves have suppressed our own anger, and so we're not able to. It also means that we're not able to stand up for ourselves in the face of someone who's not dealing with their anger well. Because there's sort of like there's the two styles of it, whereas there's the person who is suppressing all their anger, and there's the person who is like a little volcano who is spewing their anger out there, but they're not healing the source of that anger, and so they're not really resolving it. So they continue to get more angry, and you see things like road rage or people being crazily angry over something in a store that's really not doesn't deserve that level of anger. Um, and I forgot the first part of your question there. No,
Um, what would your life look like in 6 months if you believed in the magic
magic, right?
that
Right.
you see in others, that you admire, that
Yeah,
is
there's
actually a reflection of the power you have inside of you?
yeah. It's an interesting thing. I've come to see that when I'm aligned, like when I'm getting the intuitive signals, and I'm it's like kind of like the way I experience it is kind of like life is a flow, and we're kind of in this, like we're like a canoe on the river of life. And sometimes there's rapids and that, but when we have good life skills, we can move through the rapids quite efficiently. And but if we're not, we're going to be bumping into the rocks. We're going to be trying to paddle upstream and against the current, and struggling with life. Whereas when we're more aligned, that's kind of when the magic happens, because then we're going with the flow of life, and life just becomes a lot smoother and easier. There isn't the same dramas. I mean, things still happen, but there's this huge difference in the magnitude of the experience. You go from a place of everything's a struggle. You don't know who you are. You don't know how to be with what's going on. You don't know how to make decisions that you can feel confident in about your life. You go, this kind of struggle into a place where you're clear on who you are. You're clear, and so there's a sense of confidence and self-worth. You know what you like and can act towards it. You you know who you are, so you know what you're good at, and so forth. And so you can step into work that's fulfilling and where you can really contribute because you're using your talents. You're not kind of doing a Joe job that's that's out of alignment with with who you are and what you have to offer. And then in that, there's kind of a magic in that life just gets smoother and easier, and you just feel aligned. I mean, certainly there's always going to be challenges that come up and that kind of stuff, but then they're kind of like waves on the river. They're not, you don't feel like you're being tossed around and get ready to get knocked into the water, a boat knocked out of your boat, you know, and there's a kind of magic in that process.
And what advice do you have for people who are listening today to listen to their intuition when the body always speaks the truth and life can be confusing?
Yes. Again, that's about doing the healing work. And then we discover our intuitive style underneath that. And we learn to notice, oh, my body's telling me turn here or make this choice, go this way. And we discover that when we listen to those signals and we do what it's indicating, then we get the right result. We get good results. Life, we feel successful, uh, whatever. Now it's important that, that healing is necessary because we may have lost trust in that because our trauma and resistance that are subconscious can interfere. So, for example, we get an intuitive signal to turn right, and but it triggers trauma to a fear of going in the, of trusting anything. And so we don't turn right because it's like, oh, it's fear. And and then we don't follow our intuition. But if we clear that trauma to some degree, and then we become more aware of our intuition and we can follow it, and then we get the results, we get the benefits, and life just becomes so much smoother and more fulfilling.
Mhm. I know lately, like the last maybe 6 months, no, maybe more. I don't know. I honestly don't know. But like my intuition has been wild. Like I think I'm not sure if I told you, but like even when my dog died, my dog, I woke up one morning, my dog died. I didn't know she was dead. She, it was in the middle of the night. She starts walking around the house. Um, I didn't even think she was sick. I just kind of saw her shoulder go like that, and that was it. She came and laid beside me, and where she always slept. And I woke up. My child sleeps with me. In the morning, she had been violently ill. I picked her up, carried her into the living room, gave her something to eat, and I called my dog. I said, Shamrock, Shamrock. And for some weird reason, I thought she's dead. And I don't like, there was no logical reason for me to think this.
Yes.
And like, I don't know why. Maybe it's even some people were sneeze at this. You have an intake on this, David. Maybe it was a spiritual level. Because it's for why am I thinking this? I had no signs of her being ill. So I checked on her. Sure enough, she's dead. And I called two people. I was so upset they thought my child had died. Um, because I was very close with her. Like, why on earth would I think she's dead? The night before she ate, she wanted to go for a walk. I feel very bad. I did not take her for a walk because my child had been sick and I wish I did, but I didn't. And she looked like she was going to vomit. She didn't. Dogs vomit all the time. That's no concern. Like it wasn't like, oh, I have to take her to the hospital. And then I saw her in the middle of the night walking around the hall, just do that once. And then I woke up to her dead. And why on earth would I think, oh, she's dead? Like that's so weird. But that's
Yeah.
intuition. And like
Yeah.
my intuition has been going off crazy.
Well, I can tell you a little story about grad school, completely different style of it. But I looked at, I was in a place where I had been doing tech consulting, helping companies make technology choices, and and that wasn't working anymore. It became really clear that we're just like I kept coming back to it because I knew that's what I knew how to do, but it just was it had to kind of was becoming disastrous kinds of experiences with it. And so I needed to change careers. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. And so I made a list of options that I was aware of. And at the bottom of the list was a grant program that I could go on. And what it would do, it was pay for my room and board and allow me to write. And that's when I was just starting to write. But there was a lot of like, I just started writing. It wasn't a plan to write. It just started coming out. And I thought about it, but at the bottom of the list was to the program because it would meant downsizing and getting rid of a bunch of stuff that I didn't want to get rid of because I'd have to go off to, it was in the Midwest in the States, university. And I was like, no, this is not a good choice. I'm not going to do that. And then I talked to a career counselor, a friend of mine. It was a group of us got together for lunch and we had a conversation afterwards. And she said that that's your best choice. And that was also her intuition she was using. And then I went to an astrologer, actually, as a friend of mine was in town. Um, and I did a little session with her and she said, yeah, that's your best choice. So it's like, I don't know.
I don't know.
I had a lot of I mean, there was an intuitive, I had an intuitive signal to do it,
Yeah.
but there's a part of me that was just like, I don't know. So I go down there, and then just after I got there, there was a presentation at the university that I went to one evening, a couple of days after I arrived. And this woman sits down beside me. She starts telling me all about this compressed master's program where I could do a master's degree in a year in my field. Um, and I had no idea how I would make that work, but I looked into it the next day, find out I was way past and the woman tells me, I don't know why I'm telling you this. I'm not interested in it, but she just intuitively told me this thing. And so I looked into it the next day. I was way past the application deadlines. They told me it would take a miracle for, as an international student, for everything to come together in time. But there was fluky things. Like when I was packing to go, I had intuitively put my folder of documents into my suitcase. Um, and so I had my certificates and stuff from at my education to show them. I mean, they still had to come from the original institution, but I had enough to verify it to go through the process. And basically, I crossed the border to get my student visa on the weekend and started classes Monday morning. This is like 3 weeks later, and that they gave me permission to register at lunchtime to start the first class, and then formally register on at lunchtime. And everything just kind of fell in place. I didn't know how I was going to fund it. It all just went click, 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 and so I got my master's degree um, just by following.
Sometimes life just works out, right?
All
I mean,
yeah,
you have to work very hard, but
yeah.
sometimes life can flow easier
But there
than
was this
at other times.
there was multiple intuitive signals. My own, the woman who talked to me, the career counselor, the astrologer, the just everybody I talked to, and I was consulting these other people because I didn't have confidence in my own signal. It didn't because there was a part of me that was resisting that signal because it meant downsizing.
Right. And then sometimes, though, it's so important. to listen to your gut, and then everyone else is
Yeah.
telling you. But
Yeah.
I think it's more important. It's something a friend told me a while ago, few years ago. They said you can go to everyone for advice, and I do. That's something I do. I go to a lot of people for advice. She said they're not living your life, right? And she said only you will live with it the rest of your life, whatever decisions you make. And only you can make that your choice because it doesn't impact anyone else. It impacts you, right? And so listening to your gut, and sometimes we don't always see it, but if we can really come in tune into our body and just listen, our body speaks to us. And I think life can be confusing, but and our mind can play a lot of tricks on us. Um, but if we really come in tune with our body, we know.
Yeah.
We normally we have the answer. Sometimes it's hard, and sometimes you like it. But I think when it comes down to it, we know.
Yeah. And I've come to consider these fundamental life skills, learning to work with our intuition and to trust it, and learning how to be with our history, and so that we can process it, and understanding, just start understanding how we are and how this thing works, so that we can work with it in an effective way rather than just some habitual thing we picked up from a stressed out parent or classmates in school or whatever.
Mhm. And I think it's so important to just, at the same time, meet people where they are with compassion and understanding, but also to do the same for ourselves.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us. David and I's information will be below.
Thank you.
And yes,
It was an enjoyable chat.
it's always nice talking to you, David. Thank you, everyone. And please join us. We will be having a speaker come join us next week as well.